Hi, I'm Kevin Golden, member of the James Moore Manufacturing Team. Today I'm here with Mike Sibley, one of my partners and the leader of the James Moore Manufacturing Team. And on today's episode, we're going to discuss a very common term, transition planning. Likely at trade shows or amongst accounting, legal firms, amongst your cohorts. That's a pretty common buzz term. And most people have an idea of what transition planning means, but don't actually know what it looks like. So today, we're really going to talk about a few different types of transition planning, three most common types that we see, maybe some consideration, some caution, some things to think about, as well as what should we be doing now, to start preparing for that. So, Mike, I had mentioned, there might be like three most common. Would you say that's about right? There's probably like three or four most common types of transition plan that you see when we're moving from one business owner to another?
Yeah, there's definitely there's 3 to 4. You got a third party sale. You might be selling to a management team or a key employee. You might be selling to family, and then you have ESOPs as maybe an employee stock ownership program that you do see from time to time. It's getting talked a lot about these days. Each one of them have their own sort of way you have to address and prepare for them. It's not a one size fit all. There's some common themes among all of them, but each of them we have to take a little bit of a different approach. You're right. Transition planning is a term that you're hearing more about now because there's so many baby boomers that are owning businesses. Not to mention, you get into some of the older side of your Gen Xers who are also starting to say, hey, I'm thinking about what's that next stage in life. I know COVID, when COVID hit, we saw a lot of business owners going, I'm just over it. I'm ready for something else. And, trying to deal with regulations or trying to deal with employee issues, trying to deal with, the world's turned upside down. And it just kind of got people to a point where they were frustrated or just tired of managing businesses. So you saw a lot of this idea starting, and there's a big difference for companies that all of a sudden say, "Hey, I'm going to sell tomorrow. I'm going to sell as fast as I can right now. I haven't been just decided I'm going to do it. I'm going to go out and I'm going to try to get a price and I'm going to sell." Versus those companies that say, "Okay, thinking about selling in the next 3 to 5 years or so, what does that look like? And who is it going to go to?" And so then a whole bunch of questions start happening. And the idea with transition planning, from a high level, is we can think about getting what's the price that you need to get to retire, or transition the business to someone or a company that's going to hold that legacy, to make sure your current employees are going to have jobs after a transition happens. So there's a lot of different things that we can think about in transition planning to make for a smooth transition that allows you as the owner to move along and hopefully get a price that's in the ballpark of what you're really needing, so you can retire or move on to something different, whatever it is that your next passion is. But that's what transition planning is. It's trying to put as much control over the outcome as you possibly can, versus no planning at all. And you're at risk from a valuation standpoint. You're at risk from a legacy standpoint, perhaps, or what's going to happen with employees, a number of things. So we're trying to plan that out so we can make it be what you want it to be as the business owner.
Yeah, no. When I think of that in transition planning, the first thing that pops in my mind, like you mentioned, is pretty common, that third party sale, right? You go out, you advertise, try to get as much you can, you sell it, and then you walk away, right? And you're done. So, but obviously that's an oversimplification. It's not quite that easy. So expand upon a little bit for us. You said some things to maybe prepare for or think about or whatnot. You mentioned kind of roughly a 3 to 5 year. Then again, some people may be waiting a little less time or more time. Kind of what are some thoughts, or expand upon that for us a little bit about, what is that ideal time frame? What are those things, those big key moments, milestones, if you will, leading up to a successful, in this case, maybe third party sale?
Sure. Yeah. So let's think about it in 2 different ways. One way we plan and we think about it, and the other way, I see this all too often where all of a sudden, maybe a competitor, a customer, somebody says, "Hey, I want to buy you and I'm going to pay $10 million for your business." And they'll come to me and say, "Hey, I got this offer. Is this a good offer?" I don't know. It's what is the market telling us right now? And that's the first problem is, okay, they're offering, $10 million. You're 50 years old. You're going to pay X amount of taxes. Your lifestyle's like this isn't going to last you forever. And at first it might sound like it, but when you start working away the numbers and you see how much after tax and, what your spending is and so on and so on and so on, it may not seem like the deal that it was to begin with. Because, they're going to come in, they're going to do their due diligence, and I may go from 10 million to 9 million to 8 million, depending on where all that due diligence comes out. And by that point, I've seen it too often where they're so invested in the process. They're like, okay, 8 million, I'll take it. And all of a sudden, this isn't nearly what you were hoping was going to happen. On the other hand, when you come and you start saying, okay, let's think about this. What do you need to retire? What's your lifestyle look like? What is that number? Okay, let's set that as a starting point. Where are you right now? And what's that delta? Okay, so this gives us time to do some tax analysis, some financial planning, and say, what do you need to retire? Are you going to be okay? Is this enough based on your lifestyle? Because the first thing we always say is you're not going to change your lifestyle. Most people don't. They say they're going to, but they don't. So what now it allows us to really say, how do we increase your value? So you give us 3 to 5 years, we increase your value by working on financial systems, customer diversification. Is there a management team that can work there without the owner? In other words, are they all dependent on the owner? So if you go away, the business dies. Do you have one customer that's 60%? What are the things that are driving that? How do we change those things? And then, one of the things that we want to get into is let's make sure there's no skeletons in your closet. Let's clean you up. Let's make sure your financials are good and solid. For example, I've seen all too often where inventory isn't really accounted for properly. There might be issues. There might be obsolete inventory that you've been carrying on your books. There could be any number of issues with valuation of inventory. It's not accurate, all sorts of issues. And if your inventory is not accurate, and you're a manufacturer, so inventory is one of the key things. If a buyer can't get comfort, they're not going to buy or they're certainly not going to value you the way you want if they can't get any comfort on that, because they're going to come in, they're going to do their due diligence, and they're going to beat up your EBITDA. And if they beat it up, that's going to reduce your price. Let's get all those things taken care of. Let's get some of that really flush through and have some good solid years and build up to that higher amount. So a third party sale can be probably it's the way you end up getting more money by getting, maybe it's private equity, maybe it's a competitor. Private equity is buying up a lot of manufacturing right now. They're coming in, but they're not just coming in and giving all these great prices and, for a value, these multiples that are way high. They're coming in and they're doing their due diligence. They're looking at future cash flows. They're looking at backlog. They're looking at the management team that's going to run it. They're looking at financial accuracy. And the same thing with competitors, although I haven't seen as much on the competition side coming in. And generally when I have, the valuations haven't been as high, but, so you need to kind of know what you're going through. And a lot of times this allows us to then say, let's go out for bid. In other words, let's put out some information, get bids, choose the ones that fit best for us, and then work with them through a due diligence, an LOI and due diligence, and eventually a purchase agreement. So there's a set process that we can take to really control the outcome if we really do the right things in the planning process.
Right. Yeah. And I think one thing we all as business owners can relate to, whether you're in manufacturing or not, is it's never as much as it seems, right? Whether that's whatever you're making or however you're doing year to year or in a sale like this. So I think that's a good lesson you mentioned there. Hey, yeah, by the time you add in tags or add in this or that or go through some due diligence, it kind of whittles that down some, But I think another point you brought up, a good point, is knowing your worth. So, that's a great example of, well, hey, I wasn't anticipating to sell. I wasn't looking at it, but hey, I got one of those kind of what I'll put in air quotes, dumb offers that I can't just turn a blind eye to that. I got to at least entertain that. How do I know that's even respectable? How do I know that's even, kind of what that market rate is if I don't really understand what that market is? I understand how to operate in it, but how do I understand what a business is going for? So I think even taking some of that time to get some of those numbers up front, kind of get an idea of where you are, even as a company, even if you're not entertaining that or have an offer, having an idea of where that's at can give you some sort of barometer to measure against should something like that occur, or whenever you do get ready to go to sell. And then also, I like the idea. The last point is the idea of, well, I mean, people are going to buy what they're comfortable with, right? And so even if it makes sense to you and you look at everything, well, how could you not? I mean, look how well we're doing. That's to you, who's been running the business for 20, 30, 40 years, not someone who's coming brand new off the street and they know manufacturing. They don't necessarily understand the ins and outs of your business. And the better you can portray that and show that through financially, through operations, through process and procedure and things like that, then that's just going to make them, well, yeah, why wouldn't I want to buy that? Right. So I think all those are great points.
Well, you also have to remember, that, like if you think about private equity, they don't want to come in and just run the business. They're in they want to, you're part of a portfolio. So, and always the interesting things is if part of your goal as a CEO is to retire, you don't have that management team or that next person that can take you out. I see all too often where these owners don't like the new rules, the new ways of doing things, and they want to get out. And so part of that is, well, plan your replacement, plan that next step, because they're not going to want to come in and run these things. And things that you might have used as a measurement or may not be the same measurements private equity is going to look like as an example. Same thing with if a competitor buys you, they're going to have things that they think are important, and you're going to have to run by those things. And that's why it's really important to expand what you look at from your business and how you measure your business, and things that make sense, don't make sense, cash flows, working capital, all those things are kind of standard. But if you've never had to really worry about it, great. That's great. Or you just kind of knew, hey, this customer, yeah, they're always late, but we eventually get paid and things. Well, that doesn't bother you, but somebody else coming in is going to look at it and say, that's a risk to me. And that's going to cause some complications in our relationship, or how, if we even get this deal done. So there's a lot of different ways of thinking when you've got an outsider coming in.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you mentioned having someone, kind of your replacement in waiting or so forth. So that kind of leads to another one you'd mentioned is, well, maybe instead of a third party sale, we're selling to a key employee or set of employees, or you mentioned even an ESOP, which are multiple employees, all the employees, right? So, I mean, how does that look different than, okay, hey, we're not just going out and doing all this, prep and getting ready just to get as much as we can, step away like we in a traditional third party sale. Now we're selling to one, two, maybe several employees or key employees. How does that look differently then, as far as your approach to that, what you're thinking about and what you're doing looks differently now to somebody maybe who's been by your side for a while and has been key to your organization?
Yeah, there's definitely pros and cons. So some of the pros for sure are going to be, hey, you've got a team that already knows the business. They know the customers. The customers are, in some cases, the customers and suppliers may know your key employee or employees. Maybe it's a management team better than they know you at that point. So they know the business, they know how it's run. On the other hand, as potentially selling to them, their skill set. Do they have the ability to run the business without you? Can you move on? And one of the ways that you can tell that is, hey, can you go take a week or two vacation or a month, and they run the business without you being there, without having to be on the phone, 8 hours a day while you're off site somewhere fishing or whatever it is that you like to do? Can you get away without them being there? Or do they depend on you for every single decision that has to happen? So you can groom them, you can train them, you can build them up, but you can have that sense, because if your sense is there's absolutely no way they could run this business, you don't want to risk selling to them. On the other hand, if they show the skill set, says, yeah, they can run and grow this business, great. Now, on the other hand, one of the things that I often see is difficult is, how are you financing this? So Are they going to go get third-party financing? Oftentimes that requires capital on their side of things in the way of down payments. Obviously, there's things like SBA and things like that, but a lot of times they've got to put their own money on the table for that. And what does that look like? And if you do decide to finance some of it, you're taking on risk. And over what time can the cash flow support that? There's a lot of analysis that needs to happen from that standpoint. I also look at it, some of the other things we talked about in terms of the transition planning with, diversification of customers and financial systems and inventory and all those different things. You still want to do that because you're going to want to leave them in as best shape as possible, because especially if you're going to have a note on it. And, when you start talking about legacy, you've built this business that's part of your legacy. You don't want to set them up for failure. You want to set them up to have success and to, be able to make the business grow and expand, and of course, pay whatever the debt is, the cash flow of the debt. So on one hand, there makes but you still have to go through legal processes and set up purchase agreements. You have to do everything to make sure that you're protected as the person going out. They're protected. They've got to get their own attorneys to look at these things because you don't want a conflict of interest. So, it's still complicated, but in some ways it probably takes that level of due diligence down. Now, on the other hand, I've seen situations where these key employees have never really even been involved in the financials. So, once they start looking at that, does that make sense for them? So there is some complicated pieces to it, but in some ways it brings down the level of complication.
Well, and that's your last point there. I mean, that starts getting into closer you get away from a third party and in towards somebody, right? Then you start having a more emotional and mental side of it, right? Once someone, especially maybe if they're not as exposed or have been as exposed to the running a business, not running the business, running a business, working on your business, not necessarily just in your business, right? That's a totally different ballgame. That's something that, many business owners understand and, all those things, and they think about 24/7 and running their business, not just how to make their widget, right? So that changes some people's minds, right? On where they stand, what they're willing to pay for something, what kind of risk they're willing to take. So that's when you start getting into also some of that mental side of the game that, again, working now to coach them up properly, coach them right, make sure they understand. And if not, then who maybe there's someone else who's better fit for that has more of an interest in that. And you find that out now rather than at the 11th hour. Oh, shoot, I didn't realize that's what I was getting myself into. So you start getting a little bit into that mental game as well. That can be just as important or a deal breaker, if you will, as the financial side of it can be. So,
you just mentioned something important, the emotional side.
Yeah.
And I haven't really talked about the emotional side of things as a business owner. As you start thinking about the idea of selling your business, it is an emotional process. You've got your baby that you might have built over decades. And oftentimes you're not willing to see, you see it too often where they don't see the flaws, the things that we need to be dealing with or fixing. On the other hand, you also see, hey, I'm worth this. But the reality is you're not even close to worth that. So in other words, they overvalue the worth of the business because of them. There's it's something they've built and they really think it. And sometimes that gets in the way of selling. And I've had it happen before where it's seller after seller or buyer after buyer after buyer is not willing to go to that price. And market value is what a willing buyer and a willing seller, right, is. And if the market is saying no, companies in this particular industry are getting multiples of X or being like, that is kind of the market right now. And if you want to get it up here, if you want that number, well, then we've got to be able to transform where you're at right now into something more than what it is if we're going to get there. Because right now that's not there and the emotions can take over. I've seen deals die on the day of closing because of emotions getting in the way of things. And so, that's another reason why we step back and look at transition plan and say, let us understand your current state, so that way we can get you to that future state. We can work on getting you there and do
Yeah.
the things that you need to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and speaking of emotions, I mean, okay, let's take another transition form. Okay, well, now not a third party, not a key employee. Let's go even closer to home. The next generation, the sons, the daughters, the cousins, aunts, uncles, whoever we're going to pass it along to. Maybe a family business that you've passed generation for 3 generations now. Now it's going to the fourth. Families are great, but they're also probably the most emotional and the hardest to deal with a lot of times. Just at the family Thanksgiving, much less trying to run a business together or do anything like that. So so now if we're going to, hey, now it's to the next, our sons, our daughters, our aunt, uncle, whoever that may be that we're transitioning to, what's different about it? How does all those dynamics now change? Or what's different about that? And involved in that thought process and thinking now that we're selling to someone that we know intimately well, and that's our own flesh and blood.
Yeah, so this one could potentially be the most complex of all the scenarios. And if yeah, thanks. We could be here for days talking about the family dynamics. But in one way, if let's just say you have a sole child, the sole child's been involved in the business, they understand it, they're good with the customers. That we can set up in a pretty simplistic way, and we'll talk a little bit more about how we can do this after the fact. I've also seen families with multiple children, some involved and some not involved. And one of the things that is complicated there is those not involved, if they get a stake in the company, now you're starting to deal with, they might get equalized distributions or dividends or something like that. But what about compensation and making sure that the family running the business, the remaining kids running the business, are getting fairly compensated? And do the other kids have enough ownership where they could actually exert control in some way? So there can be some very complicated things. And what we've had to do in some cases is the parents have had to figure out how to sort of give them other stuff besides the company, maybe cash or inheritance or beneficiary on a life insurance policy or something. So that way we don't have this, because I have literally seen businesses fall apart because of the kids butting heads. As simple as that. They butt heads, the business falls apart, and they got to sell. It gets legal involved. There's lawsuits, because I've seen, and unfortunately I've seen it more than once, actually quite a few times, where legal gets to get involved and things like that. So
And unfortunately, and I would say, unfortunately, in that situation, it's not just the business falls apart. A lot of times, too, that can tear the families apart, too, which is tragic,
Oh, it does.
I mean, you think it gets messy with a business partner that you're not related to. Try adding the relations in the mix, and it can get hot and heavy in a hurry. But unfortunately, that can it can tear families apart permanently. So.
Yeah, and the other scenario we have is, hey, I'd like my daughter to take over the business. Okay, great. Is she involved? No. Has she ever been involved? No. Have you talked to her about it? No. Okay, so let's step back. We gotta think about that situation. Okay, so there's various dynamics with the family in terms of, are there multiple kids? Are they involved? Are they not involved? Do they want to even take over the business? Have they, so there's a lot of dynamics that we first have to work out before we get to the point of saying, we're ready to take this over. Let's take the example of, we have a child, they've been working in the business, they know it, that we want to retire, we want to fade out, and we're ready to turn this over to them. Things I start with, okay, are they trained on the financial side of things? Are they dealing with those things? Let's groom them. Let's get them ready. Let's make sure they want it. And then we get into, how do you sell to them? And oftentimes you start with the same thing. What are we worth? And of course, what do you need to retire? And so what we often see is sometimes we're willing to discount kind of the value of the business. And in some ways, we've had clients who have gifted their entire business over to their kids over time. We've also seen where they do partial gifts and partial sales. And one of the nice things is, you see parents willing to finance the sell themselves and say, hey, give me an interest rate. I get guaranteed cash flows over 3, 5, 7, 10 years, whatever the term is. You got a lot of flexibility in how you're going to do that. Key thing then is making sure, okay, how solid is the business? How solid are the future cash flows? How, can we make sure that the cash flows are going to be able to pay our kid who's running the business the way they should be paid, and be able to fund the cash flows for the note payment on that. And of course, when we get into gifting, we got to look at what's the value of the business, what's your estate. Can you do gifting without having to worry about gift tax, the estate limitations, things of that nature? Can we use up your lifetime exemptions? And we do it over time. We can take advantage of discounting on the values and all of those different things that work into it. So that piece actually makes it a little bit easier. If you have multiple kids, it gets a little bit more complicated in terms of how we structure this. Are they both involved? Are they not involved? And what things we might have to do to work that out. So that way you have fairness, because it really only hits the fans once the parents pass away. When parents pass away, all of a sudden that's when the headbutting. So if you can figure all that out in advance, make it fair, make it sure the kids have, and then it can kind of settle, so that way you don't tear the family apart afterwards.
Right.
And so that's probably some of the key things when you get into a family sale.
Yeah, no, that's good to hear. Yeah, no, that's really great. A lot of great information. Like you said, we could go for days, but we also know that everybody doesn't want to hear us talk for over an hour or hours upon this, but there's a lot of great information there. I mean, I think some of the key takeaways I had from all that: one, don't go at it alone, right? You know your business very, very well, and that's great and all, but being able to transition all of that is a whole different ball game, right? So don't go out alone. You need somebody to bounce that off of, because of the emotions, because of a lot of different things we talked about on there. Also prepare for the unexpected. You don't know when that dumb offer is maybe going to come to you, right? Being prepared now and knowing kind of where you stand now can help you to make a better decision there, rather than a knee-jerk decision, which may or may not be the right answer, right? But also, we didn't get into it and we won't today, but there's some other things, unexpected things. What if someone passes or something like that? Those are just kind of inadvertent transition plannings that now you're forced to transition to the next owner. Well, what does that look like? Is that what you wanted it to look like? I mean, so being prepared for that now, even if it doesn't take the way in the form that you thought it would through a traditional transition, right? And then also preparing now gives you options. I like options. Don't like being forced into a corner and forced where I've only got one, maybe two options. So more that you think about it now, it can help you at least have plenty of options. Then lastly, it's as much a mental game as a financial one, right? Preparing yourself to transition for something you've been doing essentially the most of your adult, if not your entire adult life, now into something else. Forget the financial and how much money you need to live. What are you going to do afterward? I mean, there's as much mental capacity, then throw the family or the employee dynamics in there. There's as much of a mental game in there to fit and puzzle to solve as there is a financial one. And they're both equally as important. So just keep those in mind. But those are some of my, kind of key takeaways. Mike, anything to add to that?
I think you summarize it with the biggest thing being prepare.
Yeah.
Okay, begin with the end in mind. Where do we need to go? Where are we now? And always be looking at how can we increase the value of our business? Because increasing the things you do to increase the value of your business will make you more profitable, make your employee base stronger, or make your management team strong. Those things will make your business stronger. So if you're not even planning to sell anytime soon, those same exact processes will make your business stronger. But certainly if you're getting to the point where it's starting to be something you see it, let's start planning now. Be prepared. Let's go through it. Let's get those skeletons out of the closet. Let's make sure everything is in good a shape. You're never going to predict everything, but let's do what we can to make that transition as smooth as possible.
Nice. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks for your time, Mike. Thanks for all your thoughts and all your advice there. Thanks everyone. Of course, if you need any help or want to talk about that further with someone, we're open. Feel free to reach out. But otherwise, just remember, don't go at it alone. Thanks everyone.
Thanks, Kevin.
To learn more about James Moore & Company's manufacturing services, go to jmco.com. And don't forget to subscribe to our More on Manufacturing series to receive updates when new videos and podcasts are released. If you'd like to be a guest, or if there's a topic you'd like to see covered on a future episode, contact us on our website. You can also follow us on social media for more news as the landscape on manufacturing continues to rapidly evolve.